Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network, a division of the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network. The following program broadcast is an original creation by the broadcast entity. Discussion within the following broadcast should be used for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice or consultation. Before considering application of any broadcast content in the following program, please consult your healthcare provider. If you feel you are having a medical emergency, please contact your local health services for immediate assistance. MS&Me Media and the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network do not guarantee or warrant the accuracy of information in the broadcast to follow. The Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network provisions broadcast services to program hosts. Information discussed in the broadcast does not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or goals of the network and are solely those of the show broadcast host. Should you wish to host a broadcast, please visit our website at msmemedia.com and submit a request to become a program host. We thank you for listening to the MS&Me Radio Network. Enjoy the show. Welcome to MS&Me. Today's interview is with Scott Montgomery, professor at Örebro University in Sweden. Welcome, Professor Montgomery.
Thank you very much.
Your study was published in the Annals of Neurology, and it comes from a collaborative study between Örebro University and Karolinska Institute, which showed concussion in adolescents increased the risk of MS in later life by 22% for one concussion, and teenagers who experienced two or more concussions were at more than a doubled risk of MS at 133%. Now, how does a concussion initiate the process of multiple sclerosis?
Well, we're not entirely sure, but we have seen evidence from some experimental studies that show injury to the central nervous system, both the spinal cord and the brain, can begin an autoimmune process where the body's own immune system starts to attack the tissues like the myelin surrounding nerves in the central nervous system.
Do all teenagers who've suffered a concussion run this risk of developing multiple sclerosis?
No, because multiple sclerosis, we know, involves an interplay of both genes and environmental exposures.
Yes.
A very small percentage of the general population carry the genes that predispose them to multiple sclerosis. So most people who have a knock on the head as a teenager are not at a huge risk of developing multiple sclerosis.
Well, why do adolescents under the age of 11 who suffer the head trauma have less of a chance of developing MS later in life?
Well, this is a question of speculation as well. Why the children don't seem to develop MS if they have a concussion? Well, childhood and adolescence represent different stages of brain development. During childhood, there is rapid growth and synapses, connections between neurons are being formed, and there's probably greater scope for redevelopment, for repair if there is damage. Whereas in adolescence, that's a different phase of development. There is a pruning effectively. So the brain may have less scope. There's also a question of severity. There are some studies have shown that concussion in childhood tends not to be as serious in terms of the acute manifestation as concussion in adolescence. So it may be a question of age-defined severity risks or this pattern of brain development, and the two may be related, of course.
Yeah, interrelated. That makes sense. Now, how can we reduce the risk for teenagers?
Well, I don't think anyone is going to argue against protecting teenagers from head injury. You know, MS is a relatively small risk, but there are other risks associated with head injury, of course. So if you're going cycling, it may look cool to cycle without a helmet, but it's a good idea to wear one to protect yourself. If you're playing other active sports, if you do get a knock on the head, you have to try and make sure you don't get another one. And just set up activities to ensure to minimize the risk that you'll have some kind of head injury that may have lifelong sequelae, consequences for the future.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I doubt anyone would argue the overall benefits of head protection in general, outside of the risk. For, like you said, MS is a risk factor. However, there are so many others. Now, in the United States alone, high school athletes sustain an estimated 300,000 concussions per year. Um, do you recommend that teens avoid any contact sports or activities, or is it just a matter of more protection?
Yes, on the contrary, I think sport is terribly important for both physical and mental health. So I think we should play more sport, not less.
Yeah.
Just play it in a way that means we look after our head.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Be more responsible. Definitely more protection against so many other injuries as well. What is the next step in the study of teen concussion and MS?
Well, we need to understand better what the mechanism is, how
Yes.
this works, and then we can understand how we can prevent these adverse sequelae. Who's most at risk? Well, one of the things we're looking at is genetic susceptibility, and we can combine genetic susceptibility with exposures to see whether or not, to see how much heightened the risk is amongst those who are susceptible. And then we also have a vehicle to examine mechanisms in greater detail.
Yes, yes. Now, it has been such an honor speaking with you, Professor Montgomery. I thank you for joining us today. I believe that this will give our listeners a greater understanding of this risk. And as you said, it's not a huge risk. Not everyone will face this risk, if they are unfortunate to have a concussion in adolescence or the teen years. However, knowing that many of us do have that genetic susceptibility, it's definitely something that parents should look at protecting your children when you're involved in these activities. So I really thank you for joining us. I know that you have a very busy schedule, so I'm going to let you go for today, but I hope to talk to you again as the research continues into the hereditary factor for us understanding the mechanism that causes this to be triggered within the teens and adolescents and later in life. Thank you so much, Professor Montgomery.
Thank you.
Now we're going to bring in my next guest. My next guest is actually Debbie Jones. She's going to come in and talk with us about her experience with concussion and being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Welcome to the show, Debbie.
Well, thank you, Erica, and thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really grateful for you sharing your experience as well, from the patient point of view. Can you share with our listeners your concussion story? What happened and exactly how you recovered from your concussion?
Well, basically, it's been a long time ago, so I may not remember everything.
Right.
But, as a little child and, I was a little tomboy and riding the bicycles with all the boys and doing the wheelies on the bicycles and everything. And we had like a little speed bump in the middle of the road. And so that's where, we could do all the wheelies because we were so young we couldn't do them, normally. So we needed a little help from that speed bump. And I guess I went over a little too far and got, popped my head. And that's about all I remember from that moment, because it just flat knocked me out. And the lady down the street, she carried me home to my mom's house. My mom, rushed me to the emergency room. And, they diagnosed me with having a concussion. But, there was no CT scans or CAT scans back in those days, Basically, they told you, okay, well, your daughter has a concussion, so just keep her up and make her stay awake, for the next, 12, 15 hours.
Right.
And so, pretty much, because it made me tired.
Yes.
I do remember that. I was just so sleepy, and my mother wouldn't let me go to sleep, and that's all I wanted to do.
Yes, you're like, just let me sleep.
Exactly. So the doctor said, keep her up, don't let her go to sleep. And so that's basically what they did. That was like, I don't know if it was a cure or that's how they treated it.
Yeah.
Back in those days. I was probably, gosh, been so long, maybe 9.
Yeah, about 9 years old.
10 years
10
old.
years old, around 10.
At the time.
Yeah.
So, that's been a long time. And, I know more from my friends in the neighborhood telling me what happened.
Yeah.
That's what I remember
because
the most.
Of the head trauma.
The stories.
Yeah, the head trauma. Yeah, they did used to do that. They didn't want you to go to sleep because of the complications that could happen. They used to fear anyone going to sleep. I guess because they didn't have proper scans back then. They didn't know what to do at that point to help us. So that's all they knew to do. And they would fear, someone slipping into coma and other complications they feared way back in the days before the modern scans.
Right. Yeah. I have no idea how they diagnosed me with a concussion. I guess maybe
looking at
like
your
those
pupils.
Football players, they just kind of look around and nobody's home.
Yeah.
I guess that's how they diagnosed me.
Yeah, I believe back in that
time
period. Yeah, back in that time period, I believe they did just do a neurological exam, your responsiveness, look at your pupils, and I think that's all they had to go off of. Back then. Yeah, so there wasn't much information they could garner from that. But now, how did you get diagnosed with MS? When did that happen?
Well, that happened, let's see, February last year, 2016. And the reason I noticed it is, I guess I let it go a little bit too long before getting checked out. But I was a big bowling on leagues and, bowling a lot of tournaments and everything. And I had set out one year, because I've been doing it since I was like 13 years old.
Yes.
And I set out one year because it was just like, it's like another job. So I set out one year, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to go back in the summertime and get used to it and start, practicing my skills again and get ready for the fall season and tournament season, and I'll be used to it. So I kept noticing during the winter, the summer season, I couldn't get my balance. I was always falling over to the right, and you had to take a step down to get to the approach.
Right.
And it got to where I couldn't hardly get to the approach. Going down those stairs was just not easy, and I couldn't. I blew it off as everything else.
Yes.
I blamed everything else. And then finally, I can't remember what made me do it, but I thought, something is really wrong. I let it go too long, thinking, well, it's probably this, or maybe I have an ear infection, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So finally, one day I just decided, I was at the bowling alley, and I couldn't walk up to the approach, and I'm like, that put it in my head right there, something's really wrong. So then I made an appointment at UT Southwestern. They have a very good MS unit, and so I made an appointment with a neurologist there, and sure enough, got a diagnosis.
It's really...
Yeah, just because I didn't have balance.
Yeah, and that you, of course, you were going to the easy answer, the most logical answers for all those symptoms you were experiencing, because why would your brain go to multiple sclerosis or an even rare disease? You wouldn't think, well, of course I have an autoimmune disease.
That was the last thing on my mind.
Exactly. Ear infection, there's more common things that could be going on with us. But I'm so glad that you did, finally go get checked out. What is your biggest deficit or struggle with MS at this point?
My gait.
Your gait.
Mobility.
Yeah. No.
And I really don't have too many other problems.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I mean, daily, it's my gait. I, had to start walking with a cane.
Yeah.
And, I use a walker every once in a while when I have to, when I feel like I have to, because of my balance.
Mm-hmm.
A walker doesn't help me walk, but it sure helps my balance.
Yes. I find that it also, when I did use one for balance, I found it took a lot of pressure off my back as well. So
exactly.
That helped with my stamina. So it seems like I could go further. So that's one of the first things.
That's another symptom. I can't seem to walk a long way.
Yeah.
And I can't seem to stand for a long time.
Yes.
Just stand, in one place.
Yeah, I noticed that earlier in my life as well. Standing in line for things like books, in line for college, all those things. I would be like, why do I have trouble just standing still?
Exactly, and why does it hurt?
Why does it hurt when I stand still in a line? It makes no sense.
And I find myself, well, I haven't done anything. Why am I so tired?
Exactly, the fatigue. Oh,
yeah, exactly.
That's a big one for me as well. Yeah. Now, have you had any?
My neurologist did come back after he diagnosed me, and he said, he looked at my MRI, and he was pointing it out. He's educating me on it, and he just looks at me and he goes, "I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't had MS for 30 years."
Wow.
That one kind of threw me back. I was like, oh.
And that seems to be that more common than we might think, especially, as the statistics show. But just talking with so many people, in our groups, it just seems like it should be more common than the statistics show.
Yeah. But that one threw me back. I'm just like, well, I guess I have a pretty good sized lesion on my brain stem. And he was explaining to me how it's cross body and everything. And he was telling me, because I was telling him about my bowling, and he said, "I bet you always fall to the right." And I was just like, "How do you know that?" Because he was spot on.
Yep.
I always fell to the right. So, he had wished I had come in when I first got it. And I'm like, how would I have known?
Yeah. It's some people are lucky to get those first symptoms, pretty early in their disease course, and they'll have optic neuritis or headaches or something that leads to them coming in very early and getting examined. And especially now that, scans are more common, the protocols have changed and they will go a little deeper when people come in with symptoms that are unexplained. But, those of us that had it years and decades ago, that wasn't the case. It wasn't the first thought. And unfortunately, many of us are more progressed by the time we get that diagnosis. Now, have you had any neurological symptoms to go along with your physical?
I don't think so. I don't feel like it. I think, is my forgetfulness, my age. I blame a lot of it on my age, too. This is just old lady stuff. I can't remember, where my keys are, so I walk around the whole house.
Right.
And they're in my hand the whole time.
Yeah, I'll do that with my phone. I've looked for my phone. Where's my phone? It's right in my hand.
It's right in your hand, yeah.
It's right in my hand.
Before, too.
And sometimes it is hard to tell the difference.
That's what I call it.
And so many things aren't our MS. So many things aren't our MS. Not everything is. But when I'm having these things just consistently, that's when I bring it up to my neuro, because it could be a clue to something else. That I think is benign. It's not an important detail, but to them they're like, and they figure something out from it. So I try to give them as much information as I can at this point. Now, did you ever relate your concussion at the age of 10 to your multiple sclerosis diagnosis? Did that ever cross your mind?
It really did, because I brought it up to my neurologist, and, he didn't really want to talk about it because that was so long ago. And so he wanted to talk about what was happening now.
Right.
And not what what happened, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I'm telling off on myself.
Yeah, we're just not going to talk about the decades and how long ago it was I was diagnosed.
So, he wanted to talk about today and not what happened a long time ago.
Right. So from his point of view, it's like, let's treat you now, what we're dealing with now, because knowing the trigger at this point, he wanted to focus on your treatment. But, it is interesting if we can find out what the triggers were, because just like the professor said, we know it's a family of genes and that they're triggered. There's a genetic factor there. Well, at least, there could be. They have to look further into that, because we don't know how hereditary it is. We know genetic. We're not sure how hereditary. But we have to then think as parents, if we have, genetic children, that, all right, now how much head protection, how much caution am I going to take? Could this possibly be triggered in my children? They could be carrying the genes, the mutated genes. So, it brings forth lots of thought, knowing after his study, and that, if we have that head trauma in those teen years, 133% increase in our likelihood, that definitely does give you pause, for the next generation.
It does, because it's like, oh my, what am I passing on?
Yeah, it really does. It makes you think. But, there could be clues they find in this. Once they find those triggers, they know more and more pieces of the puzzle, then we might have improved treatments. We might even one day have the cure. So the more information we can get, the better. The more pieces of our puzzle we can get, the better. And we as patients coming forth and say, yes, that's what happened to me, and helping them get all of these knowledge based, of what is happening with the patients in real life. How many of us are there out there that have had the concussions and then developed it, later in life? So it's important for us to stand up and be counted and give them that knowledge. So the patient databases and us learning and communicating with clinician who then communicates to research, it's all parts of the puzzle.
Well, like I had said, knowledge is power.
It really is. Knowledge is power. Yeah, it's been a joy speaking with you today. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Well, anytime, and I appreciate you for putting the show together.
Oh,
and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, I really enjoy speaking with you. And I'll see you in our ladies group on Facebook.
Yeah, okay, sounds great.
All right, talk to you later, love.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye. Before we bring on my next guest, who is the patient living with multiple sclerosis, I'd also like to share my own story with you, my own concussion story. My first head trauma actually was as an infant. My mother was walking on a railroad tracks, something we do in West Virginia, and just looking at nature with my father. And I was very young, a newborn, and she had me in her arms, and her shoe got caught up in the railroad tie, and between the gravel and the railroad tie, and she went down very quickly, just threw her forward, and of course threw me forward as well. But my mom always likes to say I had MS and lupus from birth because I was born with many health issues, which we've chronicled on another episode. But we don't know, if that head trauma triggered, this disease itself, exacerbation. We really don't know at such a young age. As the professor was stating, that correlation actually between adolescent head trauma is really a much, much lower risk for triggering the disease course. So that might have had nothing to do with it. Then I had another one around the age of 8, which is also when the medical record of my MS symptoms began, actually having that well documented, which is why my previous neurologists say, your symptoms started at age 8. That's where they tracked it back to. So we don't know if it was before that. That's just where they have record of, in their study of my medical records and talking with my family. So we were coming back from a family event. It was an amusement park, and it was the 70s. I just dated myself. It was the 70s, and all of the kids were in the back seat. Actually, we were in the back of a station wagon, not in the back seat in seat belts. We didn't wear seat belts like that back in the 70s. We played around in the back seat all the time without seat belts. And we were actually in the back cargo part of the station wagon, all laid down because it was late at night. We're returning from the amusement park exhausted. And my head was over against the side of the vehicle. And we skidded in bad weather. It's a horrible storm. And in the mountains of West Virginia on little narrow roads. And as our car skidded and went into the ditch up next to the mountain, there's a huge boulder sticking out, and boom, our car slammed into that, when it kind of fishtailed. And my head was right against the impact, right where our car was dented in. And for years after that, I would have bad dreams and hear that sound over and over and over again in my head. And my parents did, what was common back then. Just don't fall asleep. Just don't fall asleep. You'll be fine. And of course, got taken to the doctor later. But, and that is myth. Actually, we have learned, over the years that actually, concussion patients, head trauma patients are, encouraged to get rest now. They don't keep you up all night like they used to as a precaution. That's not necessary. But back then, that's what they did. Just don't fall asleep. Just don't fall asleep. But my symptoms then, long after that, is when it started being recorded in the medical record of all my MS symptoms. Did that have anything to do with it? We don't know. There's no way of knowing if that was the exact trigger or if it had been triggered earlier, or if, like my mom said, basically since birth, she has seen symptoms. So, it's kind of muddied with me having so many autoimmune diseases. I have lupus and Sjogren's and MS and on and on and on. So it's really hard to tell one from the other sometimes with those symptoms, especially with an infant or a toddler or an adolescent who cannot always communicate exactly what's going on with them to their parents or to their physicians. So my next experience with major head injury was at the age of 13. I had started having really bad heat intolerance. So the symptoms of MS, of course, were long there and had been documented since the age of 8. But I started having really bad heat intolerance. I lived in North Carolina in an unair-conditioned school. So at the beginning of school, it was still really, really blazing hot. And when you would go in the cafeteria, you just hit a wall of heat, from the ovens. So when I would wait in line in the cafeteria, I'd often get very dizzy and need to sit down. And one day I felt like, oh, I'm getting dizzy. I'm going to pass out again. I need to sit down. And when I went to sit and move backwards, I was so disoriented. I just hit the table there and the bench on the way down, and then hit the floor really hard, cracked my tailbone, hit my head, on the cement floor. And it was a pretty big impact. They carried me, to get help. And I ended up at the hospital, and they examined me. So, but I had already had the documented symptoms. So what impact would that have at the age of 13 because it's no longer a trigger? Well, my symptoms ramped up after that. So I don't know if, our original triggers can also be triggers for exacerbations or increase in disease activity. I really don't know, but that seems to be what happened in my personal case. I don't know if there's a direct correlation there, but it really seemed to have been. So I really think that sharing our stories, sharing these experiences are so vitally important, so we can get an idea, of what, happened in our case. Share it with researchers. Share it with those taking these surveys. When you see these online surveys, the patient surveys, the more information they have, the more pieces of the puzzle they can put together. Now that I have children, I'm also thinking of these early experiences, these early triggers, and my early disease activity. And, and when my own sons want to play sports or go outside and play and ride their bikes, I'm thinking of all these things. So I'm like, we have, their helmets hanging up. We have the safety equipment there. Do I prevent them from these activities? No, but I really want them protected. My 7-year-old son has already had that first incident of optic neuritis. So, I'm worried about what has been triggered for him. What was the trigger? Are there more ways I can protect him and protect him from, maybe hopefully this is a clinically isolated syndrome and he will not develop disease activity. That would be such a blessing. But, my mind as a mother is always prevent the trigger. And we do the best we can, especially with the limited amount of information that we have now. Granted, there's way much more information coming in than my mother had available to her. We've put way more pieces of puzzles together. But I think it's important to tell as many patient stories as we can to get more study information out there. Of course, we will have Professor Montgomery's study information for you guys available on our front end patient portal. That front end patient portal is www.msandmemedia.com. That's our front end patient portal for all of MS&Me Media, and leads you to the other resources for our parent company, the MS Global Support Network. So all of our resources are available to you right there on one little menu, one button clicks. You can go on msmemedia.com, and there's a button to take you right to this radio network. With one click, you'll be right to the radio page, and for the 24/7 player. You can play whatever shows on 24/7 and listen in. And you can have that one-click button into the MSGSN news. So our news network information is right there for you on that website, available with vetted MS information for you. And you can, access our other resources as well, just as easily. With that one click, you can be searching, all these MS topics and getting that information that you need for your daily walk with MS. So I really encourage you guys to use those resources we've set up for you, and we'll continue to grow and expand those resources for your needs. Just let us know your needs and we'll try to fulfill those. Now, with our social media, we have the MS groups. Our next guest on here, who is another patient living with MS, will tell her story, and she's part of the MS&Me family on Facebook. She's one of our team members, and she helps with our Facebook groups. We have many groups on there, lots of forums for you. We have ladies groups, men only, info hub, all these groups for you guys. MS, lupus, and me for those living with more than one autoimmune disease. We have pages, and we have our social media like Twitter and Instagram. So we'll get as much information out there to you in as many forums as we can on social media, with all of those links as well to that vetted MS news and research. We want you to have access to all the research as possible. So that's what we're all about. Education, research, all the information that we can get to you guys so you can be your own care advocates. So continue to reach out to us. Get involved, let us know what you need, and we'll be that support. We'll get you connected to those other MS resources out there from the great organizations already existing. There's so many wonderful organizations, MS Society, MS Foundation, MSAA, just so many, the MK Trust. So many out there. The MS UK Trust is just stellar with their information as well. Oh, MS Australia, I could go on and on and on. One of our team members is with livewise.org. There are just so many that we want to bridge that gap, get all that information out to you, and that's what this search is about, more answers and sharing our information to contribute to that information and that research. So I really want to encourage you all to participate in our online patient portal, www.msmemedia.com. Now we want to bring on our next guest. I'm going to throw to her in just a moment and just really appreciate her being part of our team. Our next guest is another patient living with multiple sclerosis. Kimberly Houston, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you could join us today. Now, Kimberly, can you tell our listeners your multiple sclerosis diagnosis story, when you were diagnosed with MS?
Let's see. I started having vision issues my whole life, but recently I decided it was time to go to get new glasses. It had been a while. Went to the eye doctor, and he seen something wrong with my eyes that day. That was September last year. And MRIs and spinal taps and blood work and 9 different doctors later, in March, I was officially diagnosed with MS.
Yeah. Now, were you working at the time?
No, I have a disabled son I was taking care of.
Oh, okay. Now, how did living with your symptoms of MS impact you trying to care for your disabled son?
I ended up putting him in a developmental daycare.
Mm-hmm.
So for several hours during the day, because the fatigue and the tongue tied is going to get me. But yeah, the fatigue was awful. So I put him in a preschool that does a lot of different therapies.
I bet that helps with your fatigue level. That way you can rest and then be able to care for him for the hours that he's at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have 2 disabled sons, so I can completely relate to that. My mother moved in with us after my spinal stroke. And after that relapse in the spinal stroke, my physical ability and my fatigue level was just so great. And she would come and then help care for him. So that really helped me out. So I completely relate to that. Now, what are the symptoms that you're still dealing with today with your multiple sclerosis? What are your ongoing symptoms?
I get tongue-tied is what my mom calls it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's more of I lose where I'm going, and I can't get the word out I want to get out.
Yes.
I still have really bad eyes. I think I will always have really bad eyes. And during the last relapse I had lost some feeling in my legs, and some of it is still not back to normal.
So it didn't return. Yeah.
Not all of it. Some of it did, but not all of it.
So you've had bouts with optic neuritis?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's been a big one for me. Early on in my disease course, I lost complete vision. And that's happened twice where it was complete, and then many times after where it was, partial loss of vision. So I can relate to that as well. Now, tell us your concussion story. I know that you've had more than one. What was your first concussion?
It's kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
I was talking to my mom about this yesterday. She says that when I was 6 weeks old, I was sitting inside of my car seat on top of a Walmart basket, and I decided that was a good time to roll over for the first time.
Oh, no.
I was not strapped into my car seat.
Yeah.
So when I rolled over, I rolled out of the car seat and hit the Walmart floor.
Oh, that's awful. Yeah, I bet that was a great impact, especially at such a young age. Now, what was the second concussion that you suffered?
The second, my brother threw a rock and hit me in the head and busted the back of my head open.
That sounds like something that would have happened to me and my brother growing up. How old were you then?
I was probably 12.
12 years old. Yeah, that's about the time that the professor was talking about in the study where it seems to have greater impact, later in life as far as your chances for triggering multiple sclerosis if you're carrying the genes. What was your third concussion?
I was in a car accident in a town next to us when I was about 18, and I ended up totaling my car.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the third one.
Yeah, that must have been a long recovery from that one.
Well, I really just hit my head really hard.
Did you?
I didn't break anything.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
I mean, I got a lot of bruises, but
Right. It's a blessing, though, that you were okay, especially after totaling your car. My brother did the same thing around that age, and he was driving my car. And when we got to the hospital to check on him, he was more worried about apologizing for the car than worried about him. And he goes, "I'm so sorry, Sissy. I'm so sorry. Did you see the car?" And I'm like, "I don't care about the car. I care if you're okay." Now, you and your mother have discussed the concussions. Did you ever make a connection between the concussions and then developing MS later in life?
Well, no, not until about a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I had always chalked my disease for MS, me and my mom both had, on the fact I had Lyme disease when I was about 12.
Yeah, yeah. And it could be, that could have been the trigger. It's hard to know. It really is. They can't always, pinpoint the trigger, especially when we have, multiple possible triggers.
Right.
It's hard
and
to tell.
I've had Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spot tick fever
Mm-hmm.
before I was 18.
Yeah.
So there was no telling, and I'm just 24 now, or just when I was 24 when I was diagnosed. I'm 25 now.
Right. So it could have been any of those sources. It's hard to tell what the actual original trigger was. Do you know if anyone else in your family has multiple sclerosis?
Nobody even has an autoimmune disease. Nobody.
Yeah. See, that's the thing that's hard when they're trying to pinpoint, because we know there is, that genetic factor there, and then the trigger for the mutated genes, but so many generations that, we may be aware of may not have had the trigger happen, even if they were carriers of the gene. It's so hard to tell. And then we can have relatives who have autoimmune disease that's undiagnosed, and we're unaware of it. So it really is, like, I didn't even know my grandfather had, the arthritis that he did, and that rheumatoid arthritis, my grandmother, and all these things until actually they had passed, and I didn't even know that all these things had run in my family. Didn't even know that my great aunt had lupus until she passed from it. I didn't know she was living with it. So many of these things can go unknown in our family history. So we sit here and wonder, what in the world caused this? Was it something I did? Was it something that happened to me? But I love that they're putting more of the pieces together through like these studies that the professor did. And I know that you working for our staff for MS&Me, and you're in the ladies group on Facebook, you've seen the response that we got just from bringing it up. So many people jumped on there. Yeah, they're like, I had one, I've had a concussion. And as these studies and these news articles come out, we really get more pieces of the puzzle that might trigger, like, oh, that's something I might want to discuss with my doctor. Do you plan on asking your physician about it or bringing up the concussion factor?
Yeah. Yeah, an appointment next week, and I have a lot of questions for her this time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know we've talked about, different ways to improve our appointments. Do you now, like, make a little list or journal or something that you take with you to appointments?
Well, I usually take somebody with me.
Uh-huh.
Because they're better at remembering, even because I'm really bad about on the way to the doctor saying, oh, I should ask them about this, and not being able to write it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always take somebody with me, but I do try to make myself a note on my phone of what I want to ask.
Yeah, that's what I've started doing. I make the note on my phone, or there's no way I can remember. Or I also have started taking someone with me, a care advocate, because of the level of progression. That way, if I forget something, they will remember. Or if the doctor's telling me something and I can't remember it after, then I can always ask them. My dad's really good at it. He's learned to get really good at kind of making mental notes himself. And then later I can ask him, now, what did the doctor say about that? And so then I have a backup person, that really helps. But I always recommend, if you can't be your own care advocate, if you're at that point of progression, then it's really good to take somebody else with you as kind of your mental computer to remember stuff for you. But yeah, and now when you are going through the diagnosis process, I want to take you back to that because I haven't been able to feature you on the show before, and I want to make sure that we get out your story as well. How did your family react when you were diagnosed, since it wasn't something that was in your family, you know?
Well, the eye doctor had seen something. You know, a lot of my family has had eye problems. I had a grandma who had a hole in her eye and had to have it fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So when he seen something with my eyes, we just kind of blew it off, you know.
Yeah.
I went to the PCP like he told me to. He did a neurological exam, and he said, "Well, I think we need to do an MRI."
Yeah.
And so I went for my first MRI. Well, I had a reaction to the contrast dye, so I ended up in the ER right after my MRI.
Mm.
And so they rushed my results, and the doctor come in and said, "I don't know why you're having a reaction to the contrast dye, but did you know you had MS?" And I said, "I didn't even know what that was."
Yeah, like, what is that? Exactly.
And so she sent me home with all this paperwork and told me I needed to see a neurologist. And all my family was like, "There's no way that that's what that is." Everyone thought it was going to end up being a brain tumor or something.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we don't understand medical stuff.
Right.
Or didn't.
Right. You're forced to learn very quickly, unfortunately.
And then, you know, my regular doctor sent me to see a neuro-ophthalmologist because my eyes were my biggest symptom.
Mm-hmm.
I had not ever pinpointed all of my symptoms down to it could be this. It was just always a random symptom here and there.
Right. Yeah.
So the neuro-ophthalmologist did all kinds of tests, vision tests, eye tests. She put these things on my head and made me watch the screen and tested something, and she did a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually who sent me to a neurologist because she was like, "Yeah, I don't like this."
Mm-hmm.
And so 2 neurologists later and a hematologist and an oncologist later, we finally decided it was that isolated whatever.
Yeah, clinically isolated syndrome. Yeah.
Syndrome. And then I had my first relapse.
Mm.
And then they were like, "No, you have remitting relapsing MS."
Yeah.
I've been on 3 different medicines since then. But I still do have an active lesion.
Oh, you do. Yeah.
And last time I had an MRI, I still had
Mm-hmm.
a pretty active lesion. It was pretty bad, is what they said.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see about how that one's doing.
Yes. Yeah. At least that's being monitored. But, you know, you've learned so many skills, thankfully, in the short period of time that you've had to deal with this to get the most out of your care team and your experience in the doctors. I think that's so important. But that's kind of the skills we share with each other as much as we can, you know, in like the Facebook groups and the social media and through our front end patient portal, which is the website. And we try to get that information out there. As soon as we get it, we try to share it. And I think that helps us get, you know, more from our personal care and keeping, you know, being our own advocate, which is so important, which is why it's so important when these new studies come out for us to really kind of talk to each other about it and to go to the source and talk to the authors if we can of the study. And then, of course, you know, follow up with the follow-up study. Like they're going to now study more on the genetic factor, you know, of what does trigger those genes and how did those concussions trigger that and what is that process, because now they know the risk is greater. They've learned that. but why is it greater? So I think that's really important. Now, as the professor said, we need more head protection to prevent these, especially in that vulnerable period of the teens after, like, say, age 10. Will that make a difference in your decision, if your son wants to become more active in, say, a contact sport or riding his bicycle or different activities?
Well, my son already owns a helmet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My son has a lung disease, so contact sports are not going to probably be his friend.
Right.
We might let him play baseball if his lung doctor is okay with it, but I am very, very strict on the helmet idea.
Yeah. Not the same way for me. My son, one of them does, even though he's special needs, he does want to play contact sports. He's begged to play soccer and a few things. And quite honestly, it has impacted my decisions, knowing some of this information, because I've been reading, their theories on it for quite a while. And thinking about it, I have tried to sway them toward more non-contact sports, like, oh, don't you want to be on the swim team? How about golf? So it does, kind of give you that little bit of fear factor, knowing they might also carry the same mutated genes, especially with me being PPMS. There's a identified hereditary form of it. And so I kind of presented that to the boys. And I am, one of those really hypersensitive moms to every time they're going out to play. Okay, what are you doing? Because I need to know if you're just going out and running and, messing around with your friends, or if you're going out there to ride your bike or, ride something where you need a helmet, your scooter or whatever. So, we keep the helmets hanging right there in the garage and ready. So it has impacted me, and it has made me think twice about things like contact sports, anything where they might have contact. They did play t-ball for a little while, but of course with helmets and protection. But it did even give me pause, when they started that. I did have to think a lot about that. But like the professor said, they still have to have active lives. They still have to have activity. It just has to be something that's safe for them. And they have to wear protection while doing it. So I think that's the key, is just making sure they're safe in that factor. But I really am so glad that you joined our team. You've been a vital part of our social media team on Facebook. And, with your experience and with your strive to be your own healthcare advocate, I think that really brings a lot to the members in the group, because they see, how, you're striving for that information. Like you said, you guys didn't know anything about this disease or anything about the autoimmune diseases when you were first diagnosed. So you had to really gain that knowledge for yourself. So I'm really glad that the members can gain that knowledge from you, that experience from you. So I really thank you for being part of our MS&Me team.
Yeah, and in the last 6 months, I've been diagnosed with 2 autoimmune diseases.
Yes, yes, you have. And as you know, I have multiple autoimmune diseases too, and it just, you're like, you get your brain wrapped around one, and then you're like, another one? Really? It's like, I was just getting used to the first one.
And I'm getting tested for another one, so
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, I'm hoping that you don't have that to deal with. And my list is like a laundry list at this point, but it's been so many years. But I'm like, okay, I think I won the autoimmune lottery.
Yeah, I think you did.
I know. It's like, why did, I don't think I wanted to win this kind of lottery. Why couldn't it have been the other kind? Yeah. But, it explains, with it being a family of mutated genes, and that family of mutated genes being responsible for all those same autoimmune diseases, like the ones I have, like the RA and the fibro and the lupus and the Sjogren's and all that. It makes sense that more than one could be triggered. But I really, really hope that they start putting together those other pieces of the puzzle by knowing how it triggers more than one and why. That will be interesting to follow as the research comes out. Then we can find out more about that, because I know we all wonder. I know it doesn't change anything for us, in the immediate to know that, but down the road it could, and it could change treatment paths, and treatment options for them to know that. And then hopefully, eventually, they can turn off those triggers. That would be the ultimate goal, would be to turn off that process. So that would be wonderful. So, Kimberly, we're going to wrap it up here for our wonderful discussion with you. I just wanted to thank you again for taking your time out. I know that you're a busy mom, so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Well, you're welcome. I'll talk to you anytime.
All right, girl. I'll see you in the groups. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. It's very important that we all put this study in perspective so we don't panic and think, well, if our child receives a concussion and we have a history of MS in our family or other autoimmune disease, boom, they're going to develop multiple sclerosis. That, as the professor's study proved, is not the case, especially in adolescence. For those who are like 10 and under, they have less of a chance to develop multiple sclerosis from their concussion. Now, if they are 11 and up, they do have, with one concussion, a 22% increase. If they are teenagers who have two or more, they have that 133% increase. Does that mean that all of them will develop MS later in life? As the professor said, no. Professor Montgomery said no, it's not an absolute. They have an increased risk. So it's not about stopping activity. Activity is vital for our children's overall health. It's about safety. It's about wearing those helmets. It's about wearing that protection. It's about not taking undue risk. So I think that we need to allow our children to have active, full lives, but we just need to be aware. Do we know all the pieces of the puzzle from the study? Not yet. They're unfolding, and as Professor Montgomery shared, there will be continued studies. They will put the next piece of the puzzles together, hopefully, with more information, more about the genetic factor, the burgeoning field of heredity, because as it now stands, the only pieces of the puzzles they have for most forms of multiple sclerosis say genetic factor with environmental triggers, but there's not a lot known about heredity at this point. So there's still a lot more to learn. We don't know everything we need to know yet about the causes of multiple sclerosis. This is just another small piece of the puzzle, and it's really good to have as much information as we can get. So here at MS&Me Media, we will continue to follow the professor's continued work. We will continue to follow everyone's work on this subject. And if those new numbers come out for us, more information, we will provide that to you through our front-end patient portal. That is at www.msandmemedia.com. That's our front-end patient portal where you can access our other resources as well. Our 24/7, every day of the week, MS Media radio network. It's the MS&Me radio network you are listening to right here. That is available with one click to click through to the radio station site through an easy button at the top of MS&Me Media, the patient portal. It's a one-click, easy access to our news network as well, our MSGSN news network. So you can get that right to their news site. Click right through to the website and get the latest multiple sclerosis news. You can also access all of our other resources. Easy one click. So that's a great resource, our front end patient portal, because it's easy, simple access to everything you need. And I hope you use that. There's so much information on there. Not only the news, information on nutrition and fitness, you will see the awareness videos on there. You can search for further patient, diagnosis information, disease information. So there's so much on there. And we hope that you continue to use that as your main resource when you're searching for all of your needs. Now, I want you guys to join me here again next week, the same time, here on MS&Me Radio Network. We will have more information for you on all of our social media websites. We will have more for you on our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of our resources. We will have this article written up for you guys so you can share with your family and friends on the study out of the Orebro University. So you will have all of that available to you, and you can read all of the study information for yourself. Okay, and that way you'll be able to share it with your family and friends and make those decisions. Thank you all for joining us here today. Have a blessed week.